Subscribe to my YouTube channel for more heart-touching stories. The grand ballroom of the luxurious Windsor Hotel buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the soft clinking of champagne glasses. It was a night of celebration, an extravagant corporate gala hosted by Daniel Sinclair, the young and powerful CEO of Sinclair Enterprises. Dressed in a tailored black suit, his presence commanded attention, but his sharp, focused gaze seemed distracted. As he greeted guests, his mind kept wandering. He wasn't just here for business. He was searching for something or someone. 10 years. It had been 10 long years. A decade ago, he had made a promise, one that was never fulfilled. He had been just a boy then, innocent, naive, and engaged. Her name was Lena, a girl with the brightest smile, eyes that shone like the morning sun, and a small jade pendant that always hung around her neck. It was her most prized possession. "This is special," she had once told him, pressing it into his palm. "If we ever lose each other, just look for this, and you'll find me." But fate had other plans. One stormy night, Lena had vanished, without a trace. No goodbyes, no explanations, just gone. She was in Orphan, living under the care of a kind old lady who ran a small bookstore. And when that lady passed away, Lena disappeared. Daniel had searched for her. His parents had too. But all efforts led to dead ends. Now, after all these years, he had convinced himself she was just a memory, a lost dream. But then, tonight, at this gala, he saw her, or at least he thought he did. Across the ballroom, among the elegantly dressed guests, a young woman stood near the dessert table. She wasn't adorned in diamonds or expensive as silk like the other guests. Her long dark brown hair was neatly tied back, and she wore a simple yet graceful black dress that hugged her slender frame. There was something unfamiliar about her, yet at the same time, something eerily familiar. Daniel's heart pounded as his eyes locked onto one thing, a small jade pendant resting against her collarbone. His breath caught. It couldn't be, could it? Without realizing, his feet carried him toward her, the noise of the room fading into a dull hum. Closer, closer, until he was just a few steps away. The woman, unaware of his presence, reached for a chocolate truffle from the table. Just as she did, another guest bumped into her, causing her to stumble slightly. Instinctively, Daniel reached out and caught her wrist. The moment their skin touched, a shiver ran down his spine. She turned, startled, her deep brown eyes meeting his, and in that instant, he knew. It was her, Lena, but the girl who had once been his childhood best friend, the girl who had promised to stay by his side forever, now looked at him with no recognition in her eyes, as if she had no idea who he was. And then, before he could even say her name, she gently pulled her hand away, offered him a polite nod, and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Daniel standing there, frozen, with a storm raging inside him. Had she truly forgotten him, or was she hiding something? He had to find out. Because if fate had brought her back into his life, after 10 years, he wasn't going to let her slip away again. Daniel's heart pounded as he pushed through the crowd, searching for her. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Lena was here, alive, standing right in front of him, yet she had looked at him as if he were a complete stranger. Why? The girl he once knew had vanished a decade ago, leaving behind nothing but memories and a promise that was never fulfilled. And now, when fate had finally brought her back, she was slipping through his fingers again. He had to know the truth. As he scanned the room, his sharp gaze landed on a waiter carrying a tray of empty glasses. Acting on instinct, Daniel stopped him. The woman in the black dress with the jade pendant. Did you see where she went? The waiter hesitated, but then pointed towards the hallway leading to the back exit. Without a second thought, Daniel strode in that direction, his pulse quickening with every step. He reached the hallway just in time to see her stepping out onto the dimly lit terrace. For a moment, he hesitated. What if she truly didn't remember him? What if she had moved on, built a life where he was nothing but a forgotten piece of the past? But then, his eyes flickered to the jade pendant resting against her collarbone, and he knew he couldn't walk away. Taking a deep breath, he stepped onto the terrace. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of roses from the garden below. She stood near the railing, her arms crossed as she gazed at the city lights. There was something distant in her posture, as if she were lost in a world of her own. Daniel took another step closer. Lena. She stiffened. For a long second, she didn't turn. Then slowly she faced him. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes searching his. I'm sorry, she said softly, but do I know you? The words hit him like a blow. His fingers clenched at his sides. You don't remember me. His voice was quiet but firm, laced with something raw and unspoken. She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the ground. I think you have the wrong person. But Daniel didn't believe it. He couldn't. Not when every part of him knew. This was her. The pendant, he said, his eyes locked on it. You once told me that if we ever got separated, I should look for this. Her breath hitched, and for the briefest moment, something flickered in her expression, but just as quickly, she masked it, shaking her head. I don't know what you're talking about. Daniel took a step closer, his voice gentler now. Lena, where have you been all these years? She bit her lip, glancing away. I should go. She turned, but before she could walk past him, he reached out and caught her wrist. A shiver ran through her. Please, he murmured. Tell me the truth. For a long moment, she just stood there. And then, in the quiet of the night, she whispered, the girl you knew, she doesn't exist anymore. Daniel's grip loosened. She pulled her hand free and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. And just like that, she was gone again. But this time, Daniel wasn't going to let her disappear without answers. Not again. Daniel stood frozen, staring at the empty space where Lena had just been. The night felt colder now, and an ache settled deep in his chest. He had lost her again, but this time, something was different. The way she had looked at him, the way her breath hitched when he mentioned the pendant. It wasn't the reaction of a stranger. She was hiding something, and Daniel wasn't going to walk away without the truth. He spent the next few days searching for answers, using every resource he had. Being a CEO came with its advantages. He had connections, people who could dig into things others couldn't. He traced the guest list from the gala, searching for any clue about Lena's life now. And finally, after hours of frustration, a single lead surfaced. Elena Carter, a name that didn't belong to the orphan girl he once knew, but the attached photograph. It was her. She had changed. The softness in her eyes had been replaced by a guarded look. But it was her. Daniel wasted no time. He arrived at the address linked to her name, a small bookstore tucked into a quiet corner of the city. Through the glass window, he saw her, arranging books on a shelf, lost in thought. The sight of her, standing there like a dream, sent a rush of emotions through him. He stepped inside. the door chime rang softly, and Elena, looked up. For a moment, she just stared at him. "You found me," she whispered. Daniel took a slow step closer. "I never stopped looking." She swallowed hard, gripping the book in her hands. "You shouldn't be here." "I need to know," he said. "What happened to you? Why did you disappear?" Lena exhaled shakily and set the book down. "Because I had no choice, Daniel." She motioned for him to follow her into the back room. The moment the door shut behind them, she turned to face him. "My parents died in an accident," she began, voice quiet but firm. "I was sent to an orphanage, but I was too young to understand what was happening. One day, a wealthy couple came. They wanted to adopt me. Or so I thought." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What do you mean?" She looked away. "They took me overseas. At first, it seemed like a new beginning, but then things changed. They controlled everything. My name, my life. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted someone to mold into their image. When I tried to leave, they made sure I couldn't." Daniel's fist clenched at his sides. "They kept you prisoner, not in chains," she said bitterly, "but in every other way that mattered. I had to become someone else to survive." Daniel stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Why didn't you come back?" She let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Come back to what, Daniel? By the time I could finally escape, 10 years had passed. You had a life. I saw your name in the papers, your business growing. I convinced myself you had moved on." "You were wrong," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never moved on, Lena. I waited. I hoped. And when I saw you that night, I knew it was you." Tears welled in her eyes. "But I'm not the same girl you knew. Neither am I," he said. "But that doesn't change what we had. What we still have." A tear slipped down her cheek, and for the first time in years, she let herself feel the weight of everything she had lost, everything she had buried. Daniel reached for her hands, gently lacing his fingers through hers. "Come back with me," she hesitated. "I don't know how to be that girl again." "You don't have to be," he said. "Just be you." A choked sob escaped her lips as she stepped into his arms, burying her face against his chest. He held her tightly, as if afraid she would disappear again. But this time, she wouldn't. After 10 long years, Lena was finally home, and love had found its way back.